working. Ooh, I'm very loud. All right, welcome everybody. I expect we'll have some more people joining us, coming from work and so on, but I want to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much for coming out this evening. It's wonderful to see all the people here and to know that there are a lot more people joining us online. And this will be recorded. Our cameras only point from the back, so your faces won't be on camera, but this will be recorded so people will be able to watch this afterward who weren't here as well. So if you have friends, people who you know wanted to be here and couldn't make it, please just pass on the link to them and let them know they can watch it anytime. I want to let you all know a few logistical things. We have restrooms. If you go through these doors right here, go all the way down the hall, and then as far as you can go and turn to your right. There are restrooms down there. There's also a drinking fountain, a couple of drinking fountains down there. And then if there's an emergency, you can't make it that far. There's also one right through this door. Go through this door and then the second door, and you'll see the restroom right in front of you. We also have free childcare this evening. So I don't see any little ones in here, but if you've brought a little one with you who you'd like to have in our childcare this evening, Larry can show you where our nursery is. It looks like Larry's already taken care of it. We have some handouts. If you came in a little bit later, we ran out of them. We're going to print some more. So the handouts just have the names and bios of our speakers this evening, as well as information from our co-sponsors. Nothing you need on the front end. So if you didn't get a handout on your way in, you can get one as you leave this evening. I also want to say that we have a couple of offering plates in the back if you would like to make a love offering specifically to help cover the cost of our child care this evening. We'd really appreciate that. Absolutely not necessary. We are all, by the way, did I say who I am? I did not. I'm Reverend Diana Davies. I am the minister here at First Unitarian, and again, thrilled to see members of our community, members of our interfaith community, our social justice community, our larger Oklahoma City. Just beautiful to see all of these faces. I know everybody is coming from different kind of situations. Some of you rushed from work to get here, or from school, or got stuck in traffic, and some are bracing for the weather that's coming, and probably were there fighting for bread and milk, things like that, because it's Oklahoma. So would you just join me for a minute, just taking a deep breath. Just settle into your seat. You might want to consciously let your shoulders relax. If it feels good, you might even want to reach up and give yourself a little neck massage. Just let it go. And we'll be talking about some things this evening that I know are hard and will bring up emotions. If at any time you need to step out, please do that. Please take care of yourself. Go out and get a drink of water, go to the restroom, walk around, whatever you need to do. But know that in this space, you are welcome, you are loved, you are whole, and you are so appreciated. So thank you for being here. I want to introduce our speakers. Their bios are also on the handouts, but in case you didn't get one, I want to start with Mordecai Horn-Petrie. Mordecai is a member of the First Unitarian Radical Welcoming Team. He is also an artist, educator, and a worker owner of Fertile Ground Cooperative in Oklahoma City. And Mordecai is filling in for us at the last minute. Unfortunately, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Lawlis are out ill this evening, sadly. So Mordecai, being the trooper that he is, stepped in and is here with us this evening. I also want to welcome Dr. Paulette Pitt, who holds a bachelor's in psychology. I'm going to leave off some of the details of all of the credentials because they are exhaustive and impressive. She is an assistant professor at East Central University in the Department of Education and Psychology. She holds contracts to provide psychological services with various agencies throughout Oklahoma. And her experience includes working primarily with children, adolescents, and young adults. Trace Savage has served as the editor-in-chief of NonDoc since the publication launched in September 2015. He holds a journalism degree from the University of Oklahoma and has covered 2 sessions of the Oklahoma legislature for eCapital.net before working in healthcare for 6 years. He is a nationally certified mental health first aid instructor. And Reverend David Wheeler has served as a full-time Christian minister for 28 years, the vast majority of these years in Oklahoma. He recently completed coursework for his Doctor of Ministry from Phillips Theological Seminary. He currently serves as the senior minister of New Covenant Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. The years past has served congregations across Oklahoma, interfaith dialogue, advocating for persons experiencing homelessness, anti-racist and reconciliation training, and working for LGBTQ plus equality are near and dear to David's heart. I also want to thank our Radical Welcoming Team, our First U Radical Welcoming Team. They are the people who gave you the handouts. If you have any questions, if you got here late and you need some help finding the restrooms or just any questions, please reach out to one of these people. Would you hold your hand up and wave, Radical Welcoming Team, so they can see you? Thank you. And we have Alicia Ravencroft up in the AV booth. Thank you so much, Ellie, for helping us with our sound and everything else this evening. So this evening, we're going to be here for about an hour, and the format will be, I'm going to ask some questions to our panelists. Each of them will have a couple of minutes to respond. We'll do a couple of rounds like that, and then I'm going to open up the floor for question and answers, and I'm going to move one of these microphones here in the middle, and I'll invite you to just come up to the microphone as you have questions. If you need assistance, if you want somebody to bring you a microphone, just raise your hand and a member of our team will bring you the microphone. And then at the end, we're going to be sure to reserve some time to hear from some of our co-sponsors, specifically from Diversity Center Oklahoma and from Freedom Oklahoma, who are going to give us some more ideas about what we can do next. And in particular, we're going to hear some specifics about some of the really awful bills that have been introduced and that we can expect to see in the Oklahoma legislature this year. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm going to start with a question, first of all, to Reverend Wheeler. Why does speaking up for trans lives matter to you personally? And why do you think it should matter to all Oklahomans?
Well, thanks for having me, Reverend Davies, and it's good to be here alongside these excellent panelists. First, a couple of reasons why it's important to me to speak up. First, quite simply, it's a life or death issue. If you're not familiar with the Trevor Project, and I'm sure many of you hopefully are, but if you're not well acquainted with the surveys, that they do a really good job keeping fresh and up to date. You can simply look like I did preparing for today, because I just always know it's there, so I can always go quickly to it. And what I did was simply look for important things that I would just point out to you, and of course bring that to you as a resource to think about, making sure you're familiar. But I just today quickly was able to go there and be reminded that 37% of transgender and non-binary youth reported that they've been physically threatened or harmed because of their gender identity. That 71% of trans and non-binary youth reported personal experience of discrimination because of their gender identity. And so, quite simply, by creating a culture of love and acceptance, we can save people's lives. And so I think it's a matter of compassion in that regard. And so first of all, why speaking up matters to me is because it's a life or death issue. And second of all, another reason it's important to me is because, unfortunately, Christians are largely responsible, and I'm a Christian minister, and Christians are largely responsible, especially fundamentalist, extremist, evangelical Christians, for using the Bible irresponsibly and using faith irresponsibly, and instead of bringing hope or healing, causing harm. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding in education that still needs to happen in all kinds of circles, religious, secular, and otherwise. But churches are nearly vacuums for important conversations like the ones that we're having this evening. And so that's another reason. And then last, I have transgender and non-binary family and friends, and this is not an issue for me. These are dear people. And so it's very close to my heart to speak up. I think that's, as a Christian minister, I say that's what Jesus did time and time again for those who experienced marginalization and oppression and mistreatment. And so I hope to add some positivity, some hope to that dialogue.
Same question?
Same question, yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Trace Savage, editor-in-chief of NonDoc.com. If you're not familiar with us, we'll hang right afterwards and kind of chat a little bit more. But I think my answer to the question I would like to think is fairly simple, which is that trans rights are human rights. And to the extent that there is significant opposition to that idea, I think that is largely based in two things that have confounded society since the beginning of time, and certainly heated political discussions in this country, which is fear and ignorance. And I think fear and ignorance have largely enabled groups to sort of think of marginalized communities as sort of a philosophical concept that might exist somewhere in a white room that I wasn't invited to, but doesn't exist down the street from me, doesn't exist in my family, doesn't exist. And we can talk about it from a racial standpoint, we can talk about it from a gender equality standpoint, we can talk about it from a mental health parity and stigma standpoint. But generally speaking, my view is that a lot of the people who are most opposed to transgender rights are either significantly misinformed, ignorant to whatever extent, or have a fear for reasons maybe I don't understand that motivates their statements and their efforts. And I think I was specifically invited by Dr. Jacobs because we met at the state capitol. It was on the day that the legislature was considering the bill that they had tied the funding for OU healthcare projects to the termination of certain type of care in the center at OUHSC. And I walked up to Dr. Jacobs, and he was with two younger folks, and I could tell maybe there was a little bit of discouragement. And I don't know why, I just felt a little bit compelled to offer unsolicited advice, and maybe that's why he invited me here. I guess it's solicited tonight. But basically, I cover the state capitol a lot. We launched NonDoc in 2015. Right out of college, covered a couple sessions in 2008, 2009, and then got into healthcare and came back. Long story short, I see people come to the Capitol all the time and come up on a day when there's a bill in a committee or a bill going to be on the floor, and the legislature is very good at keeping issue, whether it's a healthcare related issue, whether it's a human rights issue, whatever it may be, marijuana, very common, and it come up on the day that the bill is going to be voted on the floor. And we watch the debate, it's annoying, somebody says something stupid, and possibly bigoted, and get very discouraged, and they leave discouraged. And it was a tough day, and they lost the vote, which was already determined, 48 hours, 72 hours before. And so my advice to Dr. Jacobs and the two young people he was with was, this is a foregone conclusion in this vote. But when you leave here, try to leave here making one relationship with one Republican lawmaker who you stay in contact with. Whether they're your lawmaker, whether they're somebody else, say your grandmother lives in their district, find that connection, because that building is all about human connections. And it may sound a little bit weird when I say this, because I think the discussion is largely about dehumanizing bills and things like that that are run by members of the legislature. So it's very challenging. I'm afraid in some ways that somebody might say, shut up, because I certainly don't understand personally firsthand how difficult a conversation or how difficult a task I'm proposing, right, would be. Like, it's not an issue that personally affects me and that I'm personally attacked about on a daily basis or anything of that nature. But at the end of the day, the reality is every issue I've ever seen in the state capitol where progress was made over time was because somebody made relationships with the people in leadership. If we were in the state of New York and we were talking about an issue, I'd say go make sure you talk to all the Democrats and find the Democrats in charge of the General Assembly and all of them, because that's who's in charge. The reality here in Oklahoma is that Republican lawmakers are in charge. And if they don't know anybody who's affected, or all they think is, oh, people who are affected are is the person yelling outside my office and screaming and calling me a name and tweeting mean things and leaving vulgar voicemails and all that, which happens a fair amount, then it's easy for them to vote against human rights, right? But if they know a teenager in their town, in their community, somebody who says, well, I go to church with your grandmother, if they know someone and they can look them in the eye and have their phone number and a bill comes before them in committee and they met them a year ago, 18 months ago, and that person's always been nice and really polite and endearing and caring and respectful and wanting to meet them where they are. Sorry to steal your notes.
You are. You stole them all. I get to go home.
I've seen them pick up that phone and call that person and want to know, what do you think about this bill? Because now I know an actual person, and it's not just this concept that Fox News or wherever it might be came up with. So I'll probably repeat that 15 times. I'm sorry if I spoke too much, but I think that's what Dr. Jacobs wanted me to talk about and why I think this is important, because it takes time. The relationships take time, and there's new people in the door every 2 years, all the things, but don't feel so discouraged because of one day, one experience. All the change that I see up there takes time, and it's because people stayed committed and they didn't get mad at one stupid bill in one committee. Or they did get mad, but they didn't let it dissuade them. So, thank you for your time.
Okay, I'm Dr. Pitt, and I do get to go home because a lot of my points have been made already, but that's okay. I have more because I wrote them down. This is important to me because I feel like at the point that we start devaluing people, it's a slippery slope. And I think we've seen it again and again and again and again in the United States. We've seen it done to various races. If you wanted to start going all the way back to the beginning of the United States, we saw it done to the Native American people when other people started arriving here. So the U.S. is really steeped in a very sad tradition of disenfranchising others. And I think that's a pretty scary thing. It Gender identity is such a complex process, and I think that people do not understand everything that goes into it, and I'm not going to go into everything that we know goes into it, but I will say that it's not this real simple issue that people who are in power make it out to be. You always hear them saying things like, well, you're either male or female. If they would look around outside of Oklahoma and look at the globe, they would find many cultures who embrace the idea that gender is not a binary kind of Western cultural idea, but that it is something that is more of a spectrum, and that other cultures across the world have acknowledged that for thousands of years. So it's important also to me because I've had the opportunity to work with people who are going through that process. And I'll tell you, I always cry at these things, so don't be surprised if I cry. Like now, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to watch them go through it and to see their pain. It's so real. You can feel it. And to help those families as they're trying to understand what that adolescent is going through. And many of those families are steeped in the same ruts that you are hearing about in our legislature. They can't get past themselves to see what it is that they need to help the person who's journeying, the person who's going through the journey. So, to me it's important because I've seen it firsthand multiple times. I've had the privilege to work as a therapist with adolescents who are taking that journey. And the outcomes are amazing. They're amazing. I've seen lives saved. I've seen people come to life. I've seen transformation. It's just phenomenal. How can we not help in that journey? That's why it's important to me.
Hello, Mordecai. So, it's not the easiest thing to talk about, is it? I gotta tell you because I believe that I'm a bit tired of talking about it, and I'm growing wary of politeness. I want to meet people where they're at. I want to understand because it's not really gonna go anywhere if I don't. So I try to think about both sides, or the multiplicity of sides, but it's hard, and I think that we're tired, and I think that existing in a gender diverse identity is not the only part of our identities. I think that we have many intersectionalities, and that's difficult because once we realize, hey, I'm here, this is really cool. I never knew you could exist in life with such joy. You roll around and you're existing and you're growing and you're flourishing in a very quick way, something you've never known. And then you realize that maybe that's not what everybody sees. You look in the mirror and you're like, I think people might think I look a little weird, or that's why that person was talking to me that way. Because I think that also coming along with it, visibility, which is super important, especially I do it for the children, most importantly for the children, because you lose part of your childhood not existing in your truth. And so there's all this trauma that is based around that we could probably not have because kids already have enough trauma, and they really flourish. So I just think it's hard to talk about, but I also think that it's not the only part of our identities, and it's freeing to find that, right? But where do we go from there? When we realize that everywhere I walk, I feel so awesome and secure, but I'm so freaked out all the time. But you don't know you're freaked out. It's very unconscious. And then I see the kids, and I work with the kids, and we do I teach art, and I don't say anything about those things. I don't have any sort of this is gender identity in these kids, but I do see how much the binary and the social constructions on the binary affect those children and oppress those children, even if they are living as cisgender children and that's their true identity, they still are suffering from those things. And so I guess I constantly think about the people who are coming after me, because I know I've lost a lot of my existence, and I know that in the last couple of years of just being an advocate and talking about gender identity, what is that? I've also thought, what is that? And I found a lot of really awesome stuff. Talking with other people, talking with all of you, you start to unlock these things. So it's super important to be visible, it's super important to have these conversations, but these conversations cannot always be had. Because sometimes you have to take a step back and be like, I cannot have this right now because I only have this much left. Because you know what? We exist, but also we exist in a world where other things are happening. Work and financial struggles and home and dogs and children. And on top of all that, we're like, hey, this is pretty cool. Wait, it's something you don't agree with? And to do that, but then also the walk parallel line of having, if I choose to have my health in my body might want to go along with my identity inside. It may not always be that way. We may not always want to transition physically, but when we do, let me tell you, it's not the easiest thing. Now, it's not the easiest thing to have to admit to having these disorders in order to get a name that matches how you feel, and to think about all the things that are going on and all the things that continue to go on, and this is being talked about by people, advocates all over the country are talking about Oklahoma. They're saying Oklahoma. Lavender Cox, Oklahoma. She's talking about it. What's happening in Oklahoma? Why aren't we here? And I know why we're here, but I also don't. So I feel like this may not be helpful, but let me tell you, just being visible when I can is amazing. But sometimes, mostly lately, I want to be a little turtle and go back into my shell and pretend like I'm just hanging out somewhere else. But when I see people walk in and kids and they're talking about having my favorite color is pink or something like this, I can't have that color as my favorite color. And I just go, yeah, you can do it today. You can do that art today with that. That may help for a second. It may help us get to that place where we can flourish and grow. Because right now, sometimes I gotta tell you, most of it is survival. And it feels pretty weird. I think I'm doing an awesome job. And then I realize, oh my God, I've been clinging to the walls and just climbing. Please. So, I'm happy to be here. And that's all.
Thank you. There's a strategy here, and I think Teresa referred to this. We're not in New York State, we're not in Maryland, we're not in New Jersey, we are in a state where the power is in the hands of our Republican legislators and our Republican voters. The strategy is, how do we have conversations with people who have power, who can change other people's minds? And so this next question is a difficult one because it's so incredibly frustrating. But go into the Capitol, some of the stuff that we hear from our legislators is the most outrageous ignorance you can possibly imagine. They've heard things said that I just can't believe a human being could believe. And so I'm wondering if each of you could take just a couple of minutes, and when you encounter that, how do you continue to have dialogue? Or at what point do you stop having that dialogue to protect yourselves, right? But when you encounter those kinds of just horrific misunderstandings, sometimes outright deceitful lies that people have had instilled in them, do you have a tactic? Do you have a way of thinking through? How do you address that? So we'll go the same order again.
Thank you. It's a very great question. You're so thoughtful that it gets even scarier thinking about how I'm going to answer it. Mine's a very good phrase question. But I'm going to address this, if it's okay, since I'm a Christian minister, I'm going to address this, and since so much of, in my opinion, the harm that is done is falsely bolstered or improperly bolstered by many Christian people's use or understanding of their faith. I'm going to, maybe I thought tonight I would equip you with something that you could talk, if you are a Christian, maybe you haven't heard this, or if you have Christian friends who are real hardline, like, you know, these trans and non-binary people don't deserve equal rights because they're going against the Bible, or they're going against God. First, I always like to tell folks, you don't have to agree or disagree with anyone's gender identity to be compassionate. Second, we all make the rules we live by together. It's not it's the Constitution we're operating the rights of our neighbors by, not the Bible or any other sacred text. But then, let me just kind of go through this. I thought maybe this would be interesting for some of you. A lot of people aren't aware that there's actually biblical evidence that Jesus spoke positively about a group in his own time whose gender identity, I guess you could say, was not strictly binary. I'm talking about eunuchs. Eunuchs were people who were born and labeled as males at birth, but were often castrated for different reasons during the time of Jesus. And Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 19, verse 12, he said, there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. A lot of people that are just well-meaning Christians miss this really important passage from one of the four Gospels. Okay? And so, just to kind of go through that, well, eunuchs may not be a precise parallel in every sense of the word to the topic at hand tonight, which is, of course, non-binary and transgender persons' rights. There are definitely some substantial merit, I think, in this biblical conversation that's going on, and they do, I believe, intersect. So when Jesus said, according to Matthew, that there are some that are born eunuchs, it seems to me that Jesus is acknowledging that even during his time, there were also people who were born more than just male or just female in the most traditional understandings. So in a very natural way. And then when Jesus said, according to Matthew, there are some made eunuchs by others, and some made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, he's not referring to Roman Catholic priests or others who were required to be celibate, because we know, according to history, that it wasn't until 1100 of this common era that Roman Catholics and other clergy were required to be celibate. So we know that eunuchs did have intimate relationships during the time of Jesus. And so here in Matthew, what I think, in the very truest sense of the word, Jesus is indicating that some people that were assigned, in this case, male at birth, would later choose another way to live out their gender as part of their following God. That was what very plainly he was saying. And so not surprising to us, people that were eunuchs, it seems elsewhere in scriptures, Christian scriptures, they faced hatred and discrimination as well in biblical times, which is why I think it's noteworthy that when a leader in the early Christian movement named Philip in the Bible, in the book we call the Acts of the Apostles, or just Acts, runs into an Ethiopian eunuch along the side of the road, and the eunuch asked the church leader, what is to prevent me in the church, this unit had obviously experienced some shunning and some shame by the way that question was phrased. But here's the important part. Philip said nothing. And they found water and went right down, and Philip baptized and welcomed the Ethiopian eunuch into the full inclusion in the life of that earliest Christian community in the church. And so, in these biblical examples, these folks were welcomed fully into the life of the church. So what I tell folks who are Christian who think that's an excuse to give other people less rights because they don't agree or think it's unbiblical or something is, actually there's some biblical evidence there for great compassion and inclusion. And so at the very least, you're welcome to believe whatever you want. We don't force any creeds or tests in my circles, but just leave Jesus out of it.
Thank you. I'm back in the church. I'll hear more on the topic. I'm trying not to point it at the other two microphones, but I don't know if there's one. Great question. Very difficult question to answer. And I want to start by saying it's certainly not lost on me. In fact, I think about it probably more than I would say it publicly. I'm keenly aware that I get to be in certain rooms and have certain conversations as a tall, white male who's registered independent and doesn't, I used to think my hair and all that would, wave some, I can show you my marijuana card, but I'm able to be in some rooms that a lot of people are not able to be in. Thank you. And it's a curse and a blessing. It's more of a blessing than it is a curse, but the challenge is often to not overstep my bounds in certain ways while still listening in proportion. Got 2 ears, 1 mouth kind of thing, right? What I say that is I do find myself I try to play the long game in a lot of scenarios. Session starts February 6th. It has to end constitutionally by the final Friday in May. It's going to be a nightmare between 2 or 3 times. Just as an aside, Nicole, we maybe talk about this when you get up and chat about what to expect in the session. I'm pretty sure that they've set the calendar this year so that we're going to see every ridiculous bill of any sort make it through committee. They've given 4 weeks for committee work, which is a little bit longer than normal. And then they've only given 3 weeks in May for the floor deadline for the first chamber of origin, March. But one of those weeks is spring break. So they're really only going to hear bills for 2 weeks in March. So you're going to see a ton of stuff get hearings in the first month of session that you're not going to hear about ever again. And so when I said earlier, that's a trap, it's a pitfall, right? It's one bill by some doofus in one committee. It's 4-month session. Make sure that you end whatever conversation you have on that day in the committee when you're there in a way where it guarantees you another conversation the next week or the next month and build those relationships, right? Because the Oklahoma legislature, it's not just a Republican and Democrat, there's a wide Republican-Democrat split, but a lot of the core issues behind the scenes break down between what boundaries? Rural and urban, I think I heard somebody say it, right? And this is against all odds. The legislature is still, seats are gerrymandered up to where, I don't mean legally gerrymandered, but they're mandered, for rural areas to have power, right? A little bit disproportionate. We had 1 seat in redistricting this year. We had 1 seat from the Senate go from rural to Yukon. We had 1 seat go from rural to eastern Oklahoma County, right? Net 10 years from now will be a little more extreme, but generally speaking, there is a bit over proportion of is that your primary security guard? Okay, I just thought I would. I'm paid to observe. What was I saying? So, how many people here live in Oklahoma City? Probably, raise your hand. Okay, how many people here have a Democrat state lawmaker or state rep? How many people have a Republican state lawmaker? Ooh, excellent, right? Because you get to walk in their office and they have to listen, this person calls and they brought me a donut. Oh, by the way, always be really wonderful to the legislative and executive assistants. That's who controls. If you're good with the assistant, you're good with the lawmaker typically, right? Like, be really nice to them. I say that again, there has to be an effort to familiarize people, particularly in rural areas, with the topic. Because it's not just they represent a rural area, they might represent a town of 300, they might live in a town of 300 people, right? So they represent, 12,000 people or 10,000 people, whatever it is. They live in a town of 300 people, and nobody was filed or whatever. They put guns on their sign, and they got elected. I literally had a guy named David Smith, nice guy, doesn't get this issue. His son has a ferret. But the point is, if you have that conversation, if you get to know that person and take an interest in them and find that commonality, find the family member, find somebody, something to talk about. I wanted to end with, I made a bunch of notes. I got one other thing I'll come back to, but Mordecai said a lot of really powerful, I thought, poignant things. The experience, from experience that I don't have, and I don't have, and he doesn't have the experience of sitting in the rooms that I've sat in with lawmakers where something gets said that's stupid, and sometimes I speak up and tell them that, right? But I always in that conversation in a way that guarantees I have the next conversation opportunity. But your statement about how tired it can be I hear this from a lot of my friends who are black, talking about Black Lives Matter, constantly having to be the person who has to explain this issue. I've got to, it's on me, I've got to be the one, right? Don't be afraid to have a conversation with your lawmaker about the price of eggs. Talk about inflation. Talk about the turnpike. Talk about issues that are not your primary issue that you're concerned about. And find out where you agree on those issues, right? So that they view you as somebody more than just a representative of a marginalized community. Because I think that everybody in here doesn't want to just be viewed as a representative. You're more than that. Anybody's more than one identity, one label, right? So don't be afraid to find other areas where you can talk about, and maybe that person knows more about insurance than you do. I don't know. But find those places to have those conversations. And it opens up the ability to view other people as humans, and it makes it harder for them not to remember that you're also a human. And the last thing I was going to say is also, we have a freshman class this year. There is a process that happens every time there's freshman lawmakers every 2 years. By March, half of them will be convinced they run the building. One or two of them will make giant fools of themselves. Somebody will get mad at me and threaten to take away my press credentials. And then, over the next 12 months, they get through the session, suddenly they get their feet under a little bit and they can kind of be normal humans, hopefully, right? Ish. My point is, they have to figure out how to grow as legislators as well. Because the commonality that everybody has in terms of ability as an elected official is they think their deity's gift to all things on all topics, and they spend the first 4 months of their term hopefully learning, in fact, they are not.
I get a lot of hard conversations, and when I worked specifically with families of adolescents, and parents that didn't understand what was going on, I really learned that you have to listen to what people's concerns are and where they're coming from before you are ever going to be able to impact them in any way or make headway in any change. So I try to listen. That's the first thing I do. And I know that Mordecai kind of talked about it's hard, because it is hard to listen and try to see where people are coming from. But my tactic, once I listen to them, is a little bit different, because then I want to start talking to them about facts. I find that most of the information that I hear coming from people is misinformation and hearsay, or something they read on the internet, or something that, somebody told them in the beauty shop. So I just want to start talking about facts at that point and trying to help them learn something different. So for example, I had someone genuinely ask me about gender identity. And the gentleman was really asking, didn't understand. In this world, there's boys and there's girls. What is all this gender identity stuff? So I knew where he was coming from in terms of his kind of belief system. It's somebody that I know. But it was a genuine question, and it was an opportunity to provide some facts. It happened to be this individual, I also knew had a bit of a Native American background. Wasn't fully immersed in the Native American community or anything like that, but I knew that they identified as Native American. And I was able to share, well, did you know in the Native American community that this is not an unusual phenomenon? And we talked about what being two-spirit meant, and that it, in some communities is viewed very much as a gift. He was shocked. He said, I'm going to have to go research that. I never knew that. I said, well, you might also want to look at how the Eastern world kind of looks at it, in Asian communities, and how in Mexico, and how in this country, and in this culture. And he was like, really? This is around the world? Yeah, it is. So it was just a great opportunity to provide some facts, to somebody who didn't really know. And because there's just so much, I think we all know, misinformation out there, that's some of what we're combating. On the other end, the other thing that I run into is a lot around religion, and I kind of have some take on that as well. But I had forgotten the story about the unit. I really have, so that was really great to bring that back to me. But when people are coming from a religious perspective, and specifically I'm talking about Christianity right now, and there's a viewpoint of right and wrong, it always astounds me, because I have been very immersed in religion in my past life, and I know a lot about the Bible. So I like to hear people talk to me about it and get their perspective. But the thing that I have always held on to is that in Christianity, Jesus was about loving people. He made it very clear it wasn't up to us to judge anything, because we have our own issues. So none of us have to be doing that work, right? So, and I also recall how he got very upset with the religiosity in his day, because it was about judgment and not loving people. So just taking facts, meeting people where they're at, taking facts, putting facts out there, educating people. I mean, that's kind of the way that where I come from. I think we have to hear where people are at. Otherwise, they're not going to hear what we have to say either. So I think that peace has really helped me in certain situations. I have also learned to recognize when it's not a safe situation to talk about things. Sometimes people just want to rant and say their piece. They aren't really wanting to learn anything or do anything different. But you have to also, I think, make that judgment as well.
I don't know. Very good. I don't know if I'm really loud, I'm so sorry. I project. So, I think, I don't know what to do when people say that. What I do know is that after the last time we heard some of those things, I heard a lot of people say things around me that I didn't really understand why they were saying it. Like, hello, hi, nice to meet you, I've known you for a long time. Why would you say that? Because we heard them saying genital mutilation. We heard these things, and they are part of the system that we cannot believe is broken. Because it's very disheartening, and it takes the grounding from underneath us when we start seeing that these things are not as solid as we thought they were. So what I can say is that every time I came across that in the next couple of weeks, I would just say, hey, that's actually not correct at all, and it's really super hurtful. And you're kind of making a joke, you know? And I think that people forget sometimes when they're around people that they can be relaxed with. I work in a very male-dominated field and I've had my whole entire life. And that you can imagine that most of that life didn't really go so well. So I know how to banter with good old boys. But at some point they cross the line. And at some point I have to say, hey, actually that's really kind of hurtful. So what I would say, the question would be, we need to focus on community and grassroots efforts of healing. We can do the things that they laid out and they talk about, yes, facts, yes, understanding legislative and stuff like that, definitely. But we have to understand how to heal in that time and place. Like, that's very hurtful, and right now, I'm hurting. How do we heal from this? Just try to be visible in a place with people that you can be visible with and say, I'm not doing so well. I don't know why people would say that about people like me or things like that. So I also don't know how much I believe in the bigger system around me anymore. Historically, I've learned a lot of things about history out of a lot of perspectives that were not mine, and there's a lot of lost history of people that went through this before us. So I believe wholeheartedly in the grassroots movement of getting the community moving, being right next to somebody and holding their hand and just saying, I'm here for you, I see you, you are enough, is basically what I can give to this part of the conversation. I stopped doing political action years back because it was wearing me down. And I believe that probably most of you know that when you start really hearing and listening and taking it in, it's a lot. It's probably way too much. That's probably why we are living in a very hurt society, and we're realizing that most of our lives are full of, you know, there's some hard times. That's what I want to say about that. So if you hear that, if you're in a good place, be there for somebody, or just be there for somebody, and you don't even have to mention that has anything to do with that. Hey, you're transgender, and I see this is going on. Or hey, are you okay? Just making it a little bit more simple. And you know, sometimes people don't want you to point out the fact that this is going on, and just the fact that maybe you're just in a hard place. And that's part of humanity in itself, right? Just to be there for each other, if that helps.
We're running a little long, so I'm going to skip skip ahead, if it's okay, Nicole, and I'm going to ask Nicole from Freedom Oklahoma to come up and give us an overview of some of the legislation that we can expect to be coming up, specific bills to be looking out for. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. We'll have to keep it a little bit short, but we'll have some time, and then we'll do a quick kind of lightning round of takeaways from Freedom Oklahoma Diversity Center and our speakers before we wrap up for the evening. So, Nicole, I think either of these microphones should be live.
Okay. Everyone hear me okay? Perfect. My name is Nicole McAfee. I use they and she pronouns. I'm trans non-binary, and I'm the executive director of Freedom Oklahoma, the only dedicated to LGBTQ+ advocacy organization in the state. Trace mentions that February 6th is when session starts. That's when we start hearing bills. We have language for most of what we heard as of last Thursday night. And I spent the end of last week and most of this weekend reading through the thousands of bills that were posted so that Freedom Oklahoma can put out a tracker that'll be live, hopefully early next week. So all of you can see sort of all of the bills that directly impact us LGBTQ+ people that have been drafted. Every Monday afternoon, I gather with a group of people who work for equality organizations around the country to talk about the state of legislation. And it's really hard right now for all of us. Red states, blue states, everything in between. There's hardly a state where there isn't some sort of attack on transgender young people, especially on trans health care right now. And unfortunately, Oklahoma is leading the way in being the worst of the worst there. Up until last week, Texas had the most anti-trans health care bans introduced at 12, and Oklahoma now stands at 15. Across those 15 bills, they propose restricting care for people from 18 and under, 21 and under, 26 and under. And I just want to let you know that there is no age where it is appropriate to ban best practice medical care for transgender people. Those are all extreme. They borrow language from Texas Senate Bill 8 around aiding and abortion to try to criminalize helping trans kids to get best practice medical care. There's language in some of the bills that would ban Medicaid reimbursement, that would stop any public funding from a health care provider that provided any gender-affirming care at all, regardless of the age of the folks there. They're cool. And there are 15 of those, like 10 different authors. Those are authored alongside 2 bills that use rhetoric right now around grooming to potentially create a sense of fear, especially for educators. There are 4 bills targeting drag performers, some of which are written so broadly that for a trans person to show up as their whole self could be criminal worthy in the state. There is I am still counting, a large number of bills that use don't say gay tactics or censor educators, censor school content. And sometimes when I share news in rooms like this, I'm told that I'm a bit of a downer, right? Like it's a lot of bad stuff. And with our legislature right now, there's not a single Republican currently in office in Oklahoma who has voted against any of this anti-trans legislation. Like that's the reality that we're working within. There was one Republican who had voted against one of the anti-trans bills and he lost in a primary. So we are asking people to find some political courage that they have not been able to find themselves yet. And so often we frame these things, I think, in the terms of how can we move these legislators, right? How can we get them to listen? How can we get them to agree? And I would ask you to instead shift your question to how can we support trans people? What does our trans community need right now? Because it's a lot of work. It is going to be a lot of long work. And these legislators turn out after 12 years. We can't focus on just sort of molding our messaging to one person in power so that we get them to move. We've got to get people across the state to act. We've got to get people in this like passive crowd to act. And I think part of it is by reminding people that it's not just the bad statistics. We talk about suicidality and violence that trans people face a lot, because that's the reality, but we also have so much joy. Right? Like, trans people getting to live as ourselves is joyful and wonderful, and we have beautiful chosen families. And I think that it's really important to talk about why we're facing so many of these bills in this moment. These are happening all across the country, and I think it is really two reasons very much tied to the pandemic and COVID-19. One being that while some of us got some more flexibility and remote work options, we didn't have to perform gender as often. Right? Like, there was some room to explore how we showed up, what we were comfortable with, and that allowed a lot of us to show up as our full selves. I think tied to that, we also saw legislatures who were even further removed from their constituents. And it is not lost on me as I see Oklahoma sort of again and again lead the way in the most harm in this space, that we are the only state where there is not public testimony in the legislative process. So at no point in time do legislators on the record have to hear from the people that they are harming. We're tackling that this year. Freedom Oklahoma will post full details soon, but in the month of March, we'll host a people's hearing to center queer and trans voices and talk about what it would look like to have a legislature that works for us instead of harming or harm at us. I could talk about this all day, and there are two things that I really want to push. One is that in this work, so often I find that people are most comfortable, instead of listening to trans, two-spirit, non-binary, gender non-conforming folks and organizations led by us, following the lead of cisgender allied-led organizations that want to moderate the way that trans folks show up. Right? They're more palatable. They can do the respectability politics more. And there's definitely a role for those organizations. But we need you to show up with us. And we need you to push back, because the harm isn't only coming from an extreme right, it is coming from folks in the middle who want to sit with their comfort more than they want trans people to live. I get asked a whole lot how I do this work and how I keep hopeful, and some days the answer is that I don't. Right? That hope is a discipline, and sometimes this is so hard I just want to give up because I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can stomach another parent calling me because their kid had been on a wait list for 5 months at OU Health, and that was their lifeline, and the legislature shut down their ability to get them care. And then some weeks, like a few weeks ago, I go to Shauna High School, where their affirming policies became the target of now State Superintendent Ryan Walters last year. Senate Bill 615, which passed single-sex bathroom restrictions, is a result of the fact that since 2015, Stillwater High School had a gender-affirming bathroom policy in place without any issue. And Ryan Walters made that and that school his target. People from OCPA drove to their board meetings. Trans and queer students were yelled at, were threatened by parents who said that they were going to come harass them in bathrooms. And so I went to Stillwater High School to speak to their GSA, to a full room. Some of those kids, right, were very clear when they were taking a group picture for the yearbook. They couldn't be in it because they can't be out at home. It's the one place that they're safe. I was there to talk about their annual day at the Capitol, which I got to attend with them last year and will show up for again this year. And I felt so awful going into that space because I don't have a lot of immediately hopeful information, right? that if these things go to a vote on the floor, right now, history tells us that they will probably pass. But instead of focusing on that, so many of those students talked to me about how important it was to them that Freedom Oklahoma exists and that they knew that someone was fighting for them. That they knew that they had educators and community members who were showing up for them. That they knew that trans non-binary people could run an organization, right? That someone like me who is non-binary and autistic and queer could lead spaces and could dig into that neurodivergent sense of justice and use that to fuel this fight. And so it can be really, really hard to work in this space. And so often we ask trans people to do so much of this labor, right? I get calls from news outlets who are really well-meaning and they just want to talk to a trans kid, right? They just want people to understand. And I always feel so awful with that ask because I can't promise that kid any safety. We have no non-discrimination protections in place. It could out them in really dangerous ways. If it is something in print or that goes online, right, it is not something that they can take down. And so I need all of us to fight in this moment. Because we shouldn't have to prove the dignity of trans, two-spirit, and non-binary people in order to get our legislature not to enact the level of harm they are proposing. And we may not win in the immediate term, but we've got to win in the long term because there are lives that depend on it. So freedomoklahoma.org is our website. We are Freedom Oklahoma on Instagram and Facebook, and Freedom Oklahoma on Twitter. My email is Nicole, and I COLE @freedomoklahoma.org. I'll stick around afterwards too if there's anything I can talk to you about legislatively, but thank you all so much for being here tonight. And to the trans, two-spirit, gender non-conforming people, especially both in this room and online, I love you so much. Thank you for existing. You are the reason that I do this work every day, and you're going to get free.
We have time for just a few questions, and for responses, I'm going to ask people to keep it as short as you can so we can get a lot of the questions asked. And this doesn't go that far back, so I'm just going to bring it here. And I think it's live, so if we'll just invite people to come up, and we have time for maybe 5 questions, and then we'll do a round. We'll hear from some of our co-sponsors again about sort of a takeaway, next thing to do, and then very, very quickly kind of lightning round from you guys. Yeah.
My name is Carl Seward. I'm from Vietnam. I work at the library at UCO, and I wanted to ask, you talked about building relationships, getting to know people in the legislature. How do you start that process? What is the first step?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Being as present as possible. And I don't, I didn't have a prepared answer to this question, but it's not unlike developing a relationship with anybody else. Whether they're your neighbor who's moved in next door, or you knock on the door and it's kind of an awkward interaction and you're wondering, well, do I really want to get to know this person or maybe not? But, you know, I would start with your own lawmakers, and before I forget, there's a terrific app. It's kind of an odd entity it came from called the Oklahoma's Legislative Guide. And it allows you to just input your address and find your lawmakers, or input your brother's address or whatever. It's run by Oklahoma's Electric Cooperatives for whatever reason they made this amazing thing. But I would start with your own House member and your own senator. If you have another family member who's close, maybe talk to them, because generally speaking, if you're a constituent, they are going to prioritize responding to your email or your phone call. And like I said, you know, try to just make sure you get to know them, they get to know you a little bit. At some point, bring up the primary topic you want to discuss. Offer your number if you ever have any questions about how this affects me, or people in my community. Would love to offer you our perspective. And visit every couple of weeks and try to, you know, go if they have a coffee in their district, maybe stop by that. But it's really being present and being known and being, I mean, I hate to say it, it's not like anybody here is scary, but somebody out there who are trying to change their mind needs to realize, oh, I don't have to be worried to be in a, you know, situation talking to somebody who identifies in a way that I don't understand, right? And so that would be the best answer I have. Anybody else? Or Dan? Or, I'm sorry, next.
So my next question is for you. Journalism has a lot of power to frame issues and drive narratives. When NonDoc covered Walter's no-vote Sanders tweet, instead of calling him a racist, it was framed as some activists on the left found the tweet racist. And NonDoc went on to give Walter's plausible deniability that he's not racist. Being neutral in the face of oppression is standing with the oppressor. My question is, do we have a commitment from NonDoc to not give plausible deniability to anti-trans legislation and transphobic legislators, that what they're doing is not a human rights violation? Thank you.
Sure. Plausible deniability. So I think, just to be clear in that article about Ryan Walters, the interview had been done with him in the week prior to him putting out the tweet. And so I was editing the story like 3 or 4 days later after the tweet was out. So we didn't ask him, like the quotes that were in the story weren't asked to tell us about the tweet. So I apologize if that wasn't clear. It seemed like we called him as a result of the tweet. I made the intentional edit to put in there that it was viewed as racist. And frankly, I called it racist on Twitter myself. So, but yes, I think the answer is yes, that we are not going to give plausible deniability. I want to make sure I understand what that means, that bills that attack trans rights or things like that are anything other than limitations of trans rights or trans health care. We strive to be accurate and thorough in explanations of all legislation, but if you do catch us not meeting that standard, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. We'll publish any letter to the editor response to anything somebody doesn't like. Glad to do that. It's part of the job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So my question is for anybody who's willing to answer. All of you mentioned about speaking in terms of facts, meeting people where they are, etc., etc. I was very fortunate enough earlier this month to actually meet with one of the lawmakers who wrote some of the anti-trans legislation that we're currently here about. And he was nothing but cordial, but I want to reiterate this. I feel very much that he was very much just listening, giving platitudes, didn't care. What do we do in that circumstance?
I'm going to give this to someone else, but I would just say follow up and continue to be as nice and make sure that individual remains aware of your existence and your concerns and your thoughts. And I would say that's the best I can offer, but I applaud you for having that conversation. Don't be just too discouraged to continue that conversation with that individual and keep making them think about the issues at hand. Because if you think about any that conversation, I'm gonna think about that question over there, like when I leave here, right? You know, it's gonna give me good perspective to think about. So you definitely did that with that individual you talked to, whether you saw it on their face at that moment or not, they thought about that when you left the room. So keep that up, that would be my thought.
I would add to that. I think we have to ask the hard questions when we're here too. Yes, legislators need to hear the stories, the real life stories of what's happening to people. And we have to ask the hard questions. What are you basing this decision on? Where is this legislation coming from? What research backs up this that you're putting out here? How is it helping? Based on the research, based on science, show me how you're getting there. And so we've got hard questions to ask too. We've got to build the relationships, but then we need to be able to ask those hard questions too. Don't back off. This is not the time to back off. You know, so they may give you platitude, but if you stay there, they're going to hear you eventually.
Nicole, can I jump in? No, I was just going to add to that, as someone who often gets to talk to legislators about things that they're not movable on. But one sometimes it's knowing your audience, right? That there are people in that building who no amount of facts or information are going to move them, right? Like it's like talking to a wall, that this is what they think and they're not going to move. I think about often, there was a committee hearing last year, and a lot of things that were said aloud, where Representative James Williams said that when he was born, in the 1940s, gay people didn't exist. And like, that man firmly believes that. There is no reasoning in it, right? Like, he's never picked up a Greek Roman history book and I'm like, yeah. So, like some of those stuff we just aren't going to do. And so part of what I think about as my audience is not so much the legislators in the building, but people out in the state of Oklahoma who aren't engaging. Because whether it is voting or talking to legislators, so often when we have calls to action from trans votes, the only people that show up to fight are trans people. And that makes it really, really hard. We need more people. And I think the other thing is that there's room for those folks who maybe are movable to invite them to spaces like this, right? Whether it's having coffee out in their district, or in this panel where John Eccles and Greg Treat and like some trans and non-binary folks, and they have to answer questions like this, it might make it a little more difficult for them when they think about what bills they're going to put up for a vote. And so I think it's where can we shift the power that we have in those conversations.
That's great. Nicole, I do have one suggestion of common ground between many Republican House members and you in that matter is that many find Danny Williams to be quite annoying as well. So there we go. So that's the nicest way I can put it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you're right. My name's Paulette. I have kind of two questions rolled into one because it all correlates to kindness, which is something I used to dose out, and now I find it incredibly hard. I used to send so many letters to Congress members, and I would get like copy-pasted responses, still printed, but it felt like I wasn't heard. And I understand I'm going to be in person, but I am so much better in written form because I look like this. Do I need to present myself differently to be heard?
Not by me, certainly, and I don't think, I wouldn't think so, but, you know, I mean, when I was 22 years old, first going to the Capitol, I refused to wear a tie because I thought it made a statement. And now I wear it because it helps me get in the room of somebody who's, you know, from a completely different place than me, who has different values, who, you know, thinks that because I'm in boots and denim, I must be somebody they can trust. You know, so I don't know. There's got to be some element to how people present themselves that affects how people are viewed, but I don't have any thought that your opinions are any less relevant based on any attire choices.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to play the game. If you're going in there, I found that I get a lot more respect when I play that binary game the way you're supposed to do it, and that sucks. But sometimes, you know, that's the first thing somebody sees, and they immediately, right? They look at you and I know exactly what you're here for, right? I think you look awesome, but sometimes you gotta do that sneaky game, and I'm not trying to promote anything. I don't know how it works, but I do know how it works. And thank you. Thank you for your work.
Of course. All right, I can project my voice. Dan Forster, she, her pronouns. My question is a very practical one. Next step, there's, what is it? Also, up to Nicole, what's, if there's not going to be, and if there, let's see if I can mess this one up too, if there's not going to be any sort of public hearing or anything, February 6th, or is there a protest? Is there?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
There is, and that's actually what my question is about.
Oh, great, cool. Any other next step sort of thing?
So that's going to be our wrap up. So we're segueing perfect into,
Alright,
we're going
cool.
to hear this, we're going to hear about this one, and then we're going to do it. What now? What next? Please.
That was a little bit of what my question is. I do know that there has been, I don't know that it's been widely publicized, but there are some people that are planning to meet at the Capitol sometime between 7 and 1 p.m. I don't know exactly how that's going to go. There's not been a lot of instruction on that, and I think that that's important that we get together and make an appropriate presence rather than a destructive one. And I was hopeful that some people here might be able to aid in, like for myself, I very much, passed a lot of things online. I showed up and I protested, but I have not gone directly in there and tried to talk to somebody. And if you can kind of give some advice, not just about how to talk to people, but what that looks like. You get there, you walk in, what does this look like in a legislative session? Are we actually going to be able to talk to people? Or are we just going to be standing out here for fun? I mean, because I don't feel like we have a lot of preparation on that, and if anybody can share more information about that, so we can be organized in a civil, respectful way, hopefully, so we can be heard.
Thank you. So the question.
I'm going to wait here for a second because this actually goes, I'm going to actually go first of all to Nicole and Kelly and ask, you may be able to talk about this particular thing as well. And I'm going to ask for the...
Repeat the question. I think there were some folks in the back.
Yeah.
Make sure. Please go ahead. One thing I will say is February 6th is the state of the state, all that sort of stuff. Make sure you come back February 7th and 9th and 14th and 20th and March 7th. That would be my gist of it is don't just show up for the pomp and circumstance day and the of the state or the protest at the Capitol steps. Go other days when it's calm, there's no one there, and you can find a lawmaker who's sitting there just having a cup of coffee.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask Nicole and Kelly to come up and give us a charge, right? And then everybody, we're gonna do a lightning quick charge. What next? Is there an event on the 6th? What's it gonna look like? Do you know about that? What's coming up? What are opportunities for us to go and do something?
So part of that last question was about, is there a protest on February 6th, which is sort of opening day at the legislature? Governor gives a state address, ready to gavel in. They oftentimes won't hear any bills at all that day. It's just a photo opportunity. There are some trans folks who are organizing a presence on that day. I am very mindful of not telling anyone how to show up, especially people who are most directly impacted. So you can show up and organize in the way that feels best for you, but there will be some folks there, I think starting as early as 7 in the morning, people who want to try to get there and take up some space because parking can get a little wild, right? There's limited seating in the house gallery where they are. I will learn a few things like you cannot bring any signs into the gallery itself. You cannot bring any signs on stage. you, and also I'm going to be there pretty often as my full self, in like neon green pants and a trans people blonde shirt. So if you need someone to show up in the building if you like that too, I'm always down. If you are interested in setting up a day that you want to go try to talk to legislators, find me afterwards, email me at info@freedomoklahoma.org. We regularly go, like with GSA groups, with congregations, like with a large group of friends who take a day off and want to show up at the Capitol, and are happy to talk about trying to get meetings on the books for people to the extent you can, how you pull someone out of their informed section, what it looks like to go sit for a committee meeting and find an agenda, all of those good things, right? Like what shoes you should wear because the floors are really slippery and uncomfortable. Happy to talk through any and all of the logistics of that. In terms of what to do next, on January 31st at 6 p.m., Freedom Oklahoma on Instagram Live will host sort of a bill preview where I will talk through the specifics of all of the anti-US LGBT+ legislation. Would love to see folks virtually there if you want to share that out. We will have a bill tracker that goes live. I'm going to promise early next week. I'm hoping to get it live at the end of this week. It's also live, trying to summarize those. Share that far and wide into the world and make sure people know. I would ask each of you, when you leave here tonight, email your state representative and your state senator and just introduce yourself as a starting point. Hi, my name is Nicole McAfee. I live in your district. I'm a constituent and I wanted to introduce myself before session starts. And let them know the issues that really matter to you. You can just start with that like baseline. Right? My legislators get tired of hearing from me sometimes, right? I send them emails all the time. Senator Kurt, I'm sure, would love some days if I did not pay attention to that email that I sent at 11:50 p.m. when something got put on the agenda. Right? But they know that if they make a questionable vote, I'm going to say, hey, I was really disappointed to see that. Be that person. I would also charge you with reaching out to 2 other people in your network, right? Like, be family members, be friends, coworkers, and ask them to be an accountability buddy with you this legislative session and get involved. This entire process is set up so it is difficult to follow, right? Like, the number of times that I stayed up until 11:45 waiting for an agenda to be posted for the next day, and it wasn't yet, and I wake up at 5 a.m. and look at my phone and I have an alert that all of a sudden they've scheduled a sports game attacking trans kids and a bill banning next gender markers, just for a real life scenario, because there was a quid pro quo on what bills you wanted heard if you voted for Senator Treat's voucher bill, right? Like, those things happen. And it's really hard to tell people at the last minute, like, hey, in 3 hours, if you happen to see this at 5 a.m. as I'm writing this or making this graphic, they're going to hit here some really bad bills. So all the work you can do in advance to expand the community of people who are reaching out makes a lot of difference. I would say, even if you live in a Democratic district, don't think that it is ever too safe. Those people could use some pushing sometimes too. If you, like me, have the only non-binary representative in the legislature as your state representative, Representative Warren Turner, you can also send them that, hey, this must be really, really hard on a daily basis. I'm so grateful you were there on our message because those are nice as well. And if you live in a state district and you have these conversations and it doesn't feel like the best use of your capacity, find another target, right? Like, pick your person, whether it is like, okay, I grew up in Bartlesville, and so I am going to make Senator Julie Daniels the person that I reach out to, and I talk to her about how my parents are, right? Like, you pick those people. Pick the people who are leading the health and education committees, because those are going to be where a lot of these bills go. Pick the legislative leadership, right? Like Greg McCourtney's, John Nichols, Greg Treats, Charles McCall's of the world, who make decisions about what bills are and are not heard. Be a nuisance, right? Like, that is what I try to get. Go out there and make it difficult for them to make these decisions. make some good trouble, and let's have some fun in the process.
My name is Kelly Blair. I'm the CEO of the Diversity Center of Oklahoma, and we are a national gender and LGBT community resource center. We don't have a lobbying program at the center, but we support programs like Freedom Oklahoma. That is their job. And so we have behavioral health, we have primary health care, and as of a year ago, we have an intimate partnership, partner violence program. And when you think about it, those are intersecting issues that affect our transgender community. And these bills affect our community when it comes to domestic violence, sexual assault, other behavioral health issues. So if our community does not have access to care, those things will intensify for our community. And that's the last thing our community needs. As Mordecai was saying earlier, our community needs to heal. And so we need to be able to provide more services to our community instead of taking away services. So if there's something, what I would suggest when it comes to going and advocating at the Capitol, just from my experience, if there's something that you're passionate about, like if it's suicide prevention or domestic violence, if it's about youth, then I would make that your mission to take that information to your legislative folks and share that. And that's the reason why these bills are so important, that we protect our community. Because if it's something you're passionate about, then you're going to convey that information even more. And so that's what I would encourage. So, thank you.
So seriously, like one lightning round. One thing that you want people, that you would encourage, invite people to go and do next.
Take care of yourselves by finding or creating a safe space where you can be you fully and be accepted and loved on and tell real stories that matter in that little incubator of love and goodness. Support one another. It's a marathon as we continue to navigate building a world that is more loving and more just for all. It's not a sprint, so we have to take care of one another. So be intentional about finding some people and sharing your story and hearing theirs and just looking at each other for no other agenda besides taking care of each other.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. I think my overarching point was to make relationships with folks who are in positions, even when it's difficult, very hard. My final thought would be for especially the folks in the clergy or who come from a religious or particularly Christian background. I don't know the time, but I believe it's Wednesday mornings. I think it used to be 7:30, might be 8. I can find out, message me or whatever. At the Capitol, there is a prayer breakfast, essentially, that is held on Wednesday mornings. And listen to your remarks and wisdom. I think that it would be wonderful if there were, diverse viewpoints and good theological conversations held in that sort of venue. Because generally it's a welcome crowd. And I think that you've offered some great things that I think would be beneficial in that area.
So I wanted to say, as you're getting to know your legislators, do ask the challenging questions after you've been building that relationship. But the other thing is, this is going to be a tough year, guys. And we absolutely have to have plans in place to help people that are going to be impacted have some very, I'm afraid, negative outcomes. So let's get those plans in place too.
Yeah, I think you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to make friends, but you don't have to do it alone. Community doesn't have to be, but friends are good. But just doing things as your fabulous self, do it with another person, just like you were saying. Yes, find somebody that relates to you and share their stories, and take a second to look how far you come. Even if you're in a bad place, there's always bound to be an up, right? We're doing the best we can.
Thank you. Thank you again to all of our speakers this evening. Thank you to our different co-sponsors. I especially want to lift up Freedom Oklahoma and Diversity Center. And as several people have said along the way, I think they might be willing to stick around a little bit if you have specific questions for people. As on the handout, you'll see we're creating a website. We've just started it, but we're going to start to put on there some templates for postcards that you can use to send to relatives who live in rural areas or to send directly to your legislators. We're going to have tips on how to reach those people, links to different kinds of resources from different faith traditions, all kinds of stuff like that. So keep an eye on that. And as everyone has said, be strong, know that you are loved, know that you are beautiful. We are in community. It's going to take a long time, but we will overcome. We will overcome. So thank you all so much. Thank you for being here.